psychological safety is often threatened because of various factors, and brain science has made a lot of progress on understanding when does our brain create certain hormones that cause anxiety, fear, which part of the brain lights up with functional MRI and other things. Very nascent stage, but you can start understanding that the same situation can be interpreted by two of us very differently. If you feel psychologically threatened with the same stimulus, more anxiety may creep in you. In the same situation, if I feel more safe, more dopamine is secreted. There's more excitement for me rather than anxiety. So we may behave differently, though the stimulus is the same. So it was a very interesting conference. And that relates a lot with the Vedanta and the study of the human mind as well, isn't it? How do we, unless we are in a state of calm and purity, a purity, I mean, a state where our best comes out. We are so often threatened psychologically that it's very difficult to then move on to larger questions that we're speaking about if we're constantly firefighting our own psychological insecurities. So if we have time and if you're curious, I can share a little more about the SCARF model, the David Rock's neuroscience model, which is very interesting as to how we get threatened psychologically, and even just awareness of that can reduce the threat and build psychological safety. And when you're safe, you're at your best, isn't it? Think of situations in life when you've been at your best. You've just like been in the flow state at your best. At that moment, you're safe, and that brings out the best in you. So we can talk about that a little, and a lot of other things. So I'm going to pause now. Does anybody have any questions to begin with? Could be anything about Kathopanishad, Vedanta, any particular specific questions. Feel free to use this class as an interactive, and others can comment on the question as well. It just need not just be only to me. Gopal?
Yeah, so Aditya, I have a question on this pyramid of desire. So in pyramid of desire, we have the stage of acquisition and enjoyment, and then we uplift ourselves to the stage of where we start giving others, where we believe in giving more than getting things for ourselves, and then starts the self-development.
Yeah.
So specifically, what I have seen in myself is like, yeah, correct, this noble aim and then self-development. So yes, I sometimes try to add value to society by helping others, doing things, and also as a part of this, this Vedanta classes, I started becoming a better person, like getting this clarity of thoughts, and how things work, and controlling the situations and taking care of the actions. But still, I do sometimes, get into this acquisition and enjoyment thing, and that still sometimes takes a lot of my time. I mean, I don't know why. Is it like some kind of spike that I get for self-development and novel, and I'm still in the acquisition enjoyment thing, or how it is? Like, I don't know that I'm trying to climb up, but I'm still in that acquisition enjoyment. Something which I have not seen before, and if it is coming in front of me, I try to acquire it, or I try to have enjoyment with it. So yeah, that's the dilemma that I have. Like, where am I at this point of time in this pyramid of desire?
Yeah, it's a great question, Gopal, and it's a great question because it leads to further understanding of the pyramid of desires. Because when you communicate something, you can communicate pyramid of desires in 8 hours or in 5 minutes. So it's questions like these that lead to further things that we might not have dwelt in detail. Gopal, in the pyramid of desires, especially those 3 stages, very important 3 stages that you're talking about. Why is it the most important 3 stages? Because the first 2, childhood and teen and youth, all of us have crossed. It's more of a physical enhancement of our personality. With no effort, we all reach the adult stage in life. By the time you're 20, 25, the toys and joys of a youth and the typical hormonal funs and games of a teenage. You've kind of grown beyond that. There is an imprint of that fits into your adult zone, but you kind of physically grown into the adult zone. So most people in that adult are acquisition and enjoyment. So that's the useful first stage for us to begin with. And above self-development, self-inquiry and self-realization is esoteric. We can only intellectually think about that. It may not speak to all of us today. So the three very important stages to think about is what you rightly said, which is adult, noble aim, and self-development. All of these three stages, Gopal, is not determined by action. It doesn't mean that a noble aim person must be doing some NGO activity or doing public service, and acquisition enjoyment must be a greedy capitalistic person who wants to buy that ranch in a beautiful $3 million. It's not at the level of action alone. It is at the level of the attitude with which we dispense the duties that we have. So it is the mindset, attitude that determines where you are. So the same job, say there are two doctors, for example, Gopal, and Dr. 1 and Dr. 2. Imagine they have very similar backgrounds, same age, same medical qualifications, same therapy area that they specialize in, similar hospitals they work in, similar seniority, similar cities. So very two similar doctors. Now, if you ask the first doctor the attitude with which he or she dispenses his or her duty, you see that it's primarily making money, primarily a money-making venture, primarily a way to acquire more name, fame, money, status, power, for example, right? And the second doctor, the attitude with which he or she is dispensing her duty or his duty is, how can I be of service? How can I help? How can I be of service? Now, the attitude behind that profession determines more of where they are. It doesn't mean that the second doctor, therefore, is a pauper, in poverty, doesn't make money. No, that is stupid as well, isn't it? But the idea is the attitude with which you're doing it is to help the society. Not just the society, in your profession. Vedanta says that if you have a talent or skill, if that's your intrinsic swabhava, for example, it is your duty to give that skill to the world. You don't need to hide away in a cave in the Himalayas. If you're good at something, it's your obligation to give back to the world. Why? Because we have been a recipient of so many people's talents that we live in such luxury, isn't it? That the talents of technology people in Silicon Valley has made our life better. The talent of farmers have made our life better. The talent of artists have lightened up our weekend by watching amazing movies on TV. So if you have a talent, it's your obligation to give. But how you dispense that talent, with what attitude you give that talent to the world, determines your quality of happiness that you draw from it. So in that sense, others' experience of you is determined by the attitude with which you engage in whatever duty, whatever skill, whatever talent that you give back to the world. You may be a school teacher, a software engineer, a consultant, a banker, or a sage, it doesn't matter. With what attitude you dispense that determines whether you're mentally in the adult phase or mentally in the noble aim phase. So that's the first thing to understand. And over time, counterintuitively, karma catches up. Meaning, terrestrial causation, as we have seen, karma has two parts to it, the physical terrestrial cause and effect. Terrestrial causation may give us a wrong idea that the first doctor seems to be more successful in this world than the second doctor. Though the second one is also successful, the first doctor is like chief doctor, chief dermatologist in Apollo. Wow, more money, bigger house, more trips, more conferences to attend in Mauritius and other places where these doctors keep flying to. I worked a lot, consulted a lot in the pharma sector in India, so I know all the stuff that happens there. But that's the first terrestrial causation, which is within our window of observation, because it's gross, it's physical. We can see what success is, failure is. So we assume that Dr. One is successful. But karma is about the experience of life. How much of equanimity, how much of peace, how well you can sleep in the night. So karma says, karma is where agency is involved. So that in that doctor's mind, Dr. A's and Dr. B's mind, what's their experience of life? Dr. One is often threatened that no other doctor should become more powerful than him because he'll lose his status, or he needs more and more rich patients because he has an hourly billing rate of whatever 40,000 rupees. So even he has a softer side in him existed 20 years earlier, where he wanted to go into the villages, go into the masses, help people, because he's a qualified doctor. He is in the 1% of the 1% of India's population. However, he's now caught up in acquisition and enjoyment that even the best in him, which existed in him in seed form, is too busy to expand himself into those things. Right? Sometimes we find out, right? We've got caught into something, we just go on and on. We cannot go back now. You already have 3 kids. You already have a bank account loan. You already are the senior doctor in Apollo. If you're a senior doctor in Apollo, the Apollo management is going to come pounce on you if you don't get them the metrics achieved, etc., etc., etc. So his experience of life is held hostage, unfortunately, to the traps that he has fallen into because of the attitude in that adult phase. Now, the experience of life for Dr. 2 is a different experience of life. So that is karma. So that's the first thing to understand. So the adult noble aim and self-development is the attitude with which we dispense our duties. As Martin Luther King Jr. says in his very famous speech, if your lot were meant to be street sweepers, if your lot were meant to be, which means if you are unfortunately meant to be a street sweeper in this life as a profession, sweep the streets like how Michelangelo painted, sweep the streets like how Shakespeare wrote poetry, sweep the streets like how Beethoven composed music. Sweep the streets in a way that the host of gods would look down upon you and say, there lived a great street sweeper. So it's an attitude with which you sweep that street. But the quality with which you deliver work is directly determined by the purpose and the attitude with which you dispense that duty. That is the difference between adult and noble aim. Noble aim is not about leaving what we are doing now and doing something for the society. Noble aim is shifting the direction from me to larger purpose, beyond me. How can I help? How can I be a service center than a demand center? And Vedanta launches that when we shift that soul lens of our focus from me, which is the adult phase, acquisition, enjoyment is all about me, to externally, how can I be of service? What can I do in this job? Then automatically the quality of happiness shoots up manyfold. So that's the attitude with which we engage in this world. A simple way to put these 3 levels is adult is a selfish level. So quality of engagement is selfish. Noble aim is unselfish, is the opposite of selfish, which is my sole focus is to be noble, to be virtuous, to help. Self-development is neither being selfish nor being unselfish. Self-development is being selfless. So selfish, unselfish, selfless. Selfless is not getting caught up in the noble aim as well, as much as not getting caught up in adulthood. The purpose in self-development is not to help the world, save the world. The purpose in self-development is self-sufficiency. How do I be objective? That I'm not caught myself into the samsara of the selfish world or samsara of the unselfish world, but I am being objective because the sole focus is self-sufficiency, so that I can ask larger questions in life. So it's the attitude that changes, Gopal, not necessarily what you do. So if you are over time, slowly, drip by drip, able to audit your own attitude with which you are a son, attitude of you as the worker in the company, attitude of you as a citizen of the country, attitude of you as the brother of a sister, whatever roles that you play. The moment you change that attitude to a noble aim, then you go into the noble aim. You may not be helping kids in Africa. That's not the purpose of noble aim. You can do that as well. But the purpose is to change the attitude with which we dispense our desires. Then automatically you see greater response from the world and greater peace of mind and a good night's sleep. Does that help, Gopal?
Yeah. So I understand that I can still have some kind of acquisition and enjoyment, but if I have the right attitude, and if I engage in the right activity with the right mindset and right attitude, then yes, I can say that yes, I'm climbing the ladder and I'm there at the self-development stage.
That is absolutely correct. But the trick here is this. The idea is not to curb acquisition and enjoyment. The idea is to expose yourself to higher joy of the noble aim. Then automatically, some of the things which you're so possessive about today that you cannot live without, that acquisition, will automatically wither away. Some will continue. You don't need to force fit. I will stop watching movies. It's not like that, right? The moment you experience a greater joy of giving, being of service, being generous, seeing a smile on somebody else's face for which you are a cause for it, then you want to replicate that. You know that when people are suffering, you can be of help. It's not going in search of being of help. It's with your own kith and kin around you to start with. That's the most difficult place to start with. And then you automatically, you feel sacrificing watching your favorite TV show because somebody else in your house wants to watch their favorite TV show at the same time. It's not a big sacrifice you start feeling after a while. Right? So you will see that transformation in you, where simple things that you could not do without, since that sacrifice gives you greater joy than quenching that desire at that point in time. At the moment in adulthood, quenching that desire offers greater immediate spike of happiness as compared to giving it away to somebody else because of our own reinforced ego and all of that. But if you're trying to U-turn your attitude towards the same activity, there will be a point you realize in that sacrifice of saying, all right, you watch your favorite serial. I can always watch the cricket match recorded later. In that sacrifice, you're getting more joy than actually watching that whatever you wanted to. But you should be careful not to fall in the trap of unselfish behavior, which is, I sacrificed, and reminding that person 50 times later, remember, I sacrificed that TV show for you. I sacrificed this for you. And that is again acquisition and enjoyment, because you're acquiring some brownie points to use that later to that person. But noble aim is where you don't feel the pain of sacrifice. Like suddenly, Gopal, if it's a very, 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 we all have some soft corner, isn't it? I have a soft corner towards old women because I love my grandmother and I saw that she was suffering. So any destitute old woman, I help a few societies of people who take care of. We cannot help everybody, unfortunately, but you can pick whatever is closest to your heart. So if I have to spend a few hours with aged women who have nobody else in their lives, and if that comes in the same time that I have to do some other work, at that moment, I don't feel that as a sacrifice that I can use later to my advantage. I feel like, I'm so fortunate to be able to do that. So that feeling of sacrifice should not be there. Then you are in noble aim. If you think that you're sacrificing, then you're still in acquisition enjoyment. You're always doing it with the motive. Because why else would you do it? If you feel that you're sacrificing and yet sacrificing, you're doing it for some other reason. You can use it later. But true noble aim, over time, you stop feeling that it's a big loss that you are going through to help somebody. So that shift in attitude is the shift to noble aim.
Yes, it has clarified. Thank you.
Well, good question though. Any other questions, Sindhuja?
Yeah. Hi, Aditya. I have a question. So one of the tenets of Vedanta and Gita is it advises us to relinquish the sense of doership, right, for any activity. It says, bring down, like, don't think I am the doer, take out the I from the equation. So my question is, when there is absolutely no sense of doership and there's absolute dispassion, right? I understand why there is less pain, because failure doesn't affect us, and when things go wrong, we feel we still did our best and so on. But I feel like when there's no pain, there's also no pleasure. So even when there is success, or even when things go well, if there is 100% no sense of me there, then I don't feel joy as well, because I was not the doer, right? I'm so dispassionate. So my question is, so when one goes up the pyramid and the sense of self goes down, I see that they probably will be more peaceful and more equanimous and so on. But I somehow feel they'll also experience less pleasure in life, not pleasure in the sense of sensory enjoyment, but just that sense of joy or gratification. So is that right? It's not right, but I want to know, why is it not right? Yeah.
It is, and it's a lovely question, Sindhuja. Thanks for asking. Sindhuja is again another person who thinks deep and uses her intellect. So Sindhuja, yes, the pleasure as defined as the opposite of pain, that also goes down. So the spike of pain, the opposite of that being the pleasure, when you both go down, because you've outgrown the desire. Remember, pleasure and pain, as we define it, can be caused only where there is a desire. That's why you have no pleasure or pain in terms of, say, cigarettes if you don't smoke, because you don't have a desire there. It can neither give you pleasure nor can it give you pain, right? For example, you don't have pleasure or pain, say, in just giving an example, in not having a fancy, say, Hugo Boss bag, because you didn't place a desire there. The moment you place a desire there, because of X number of reasons, your friend has told you something, then that bag can be the cause of pleasure and pain. So this duality of pleasure and pain both go down when you reduce doership. Then what's the point of reducing doership? That's Sindhuja's question. If pain goes, it's fine, but if pleasure also goes, what's fine? Because if I've reduced doership, I've reduced both pain and pleasure. Yes, but what pleasure reduces? Pleasure, as we define as the opposite of pain in this duality. What sets there, Sindhuja, is a more permanent state of bliss and pleasure that's outside of this polarity of pleasure and pain, that activity-based pleasure and pain, conditional pleasure and pain. So the presence of this condition pleasure, absence of this condition pain. So that presence and absence, condition-based, externally determined pleasure and pain, that both of that goes down. What sets in is a more intrinsic, more permanent state of bliss and pleasure, which resides in you. It's not determined by that condition anymore, right? So that's the pleasure that sets in. It's a different pleasure than the activity-based pleasure. So your pleasure is not determined by the presence or absence of that activity or that particular task or that particular object. When you drop the doership of that, the pain that doership would have brought also goes. The pleasure, that egoistic pleasure that the doership would have brought you, also goes. But what remains is not void. What remains is that pleasure of self-sufficiency that takes its place, which is now not conditional dependent. It is your own. You have control over that pleasure. It's a permanent state, irrespective of what's happening around you.
Yeah, so yeah, I thought it would be void, a void filled with peace, but it nevertheless seemed very bleak. But if there is going to be no pain and pleasure there, because pain and pleasure also act as feedback, right? When I have pain, I know that I have to reduce that activity, or when something gives me pleasure, I do more of it. So if
Yeah.
someone is so equanimous that they're always filled with more intrinsic bliss, how do they decide what to do with their life? Like, how do they know the direction, what next, if there's no pain or pleasure?
Yeah, so it's a good question again. So the pain and pleasure, as feedback loop continues to exist, meaning, as we said last time, even the great Ramakrishna, when he had throat cancer, he can still feel the pain. He can still feel the physical pain, the mental pain, whatever it is. Is he suffering? No. So what reduces when we say pain colloquially is not the pain in terms of feedback loop of, oh, I'm able to sense my body being in pain. I'm able to sense that, my anger is kind of uprising, emerging. So you can sense the pain and pleasure in all your objects, which is your physical body, your mental body, and all of that. But you are not vested in it, so you're not suffering because of that. So that suffering is what reduces. That's number one. So it's not that if you reduce doership, you don't feel your body anymore, you don't feel your mind anymore. You feel all of that, but and you use it as feedback loop intelligently, because you've not lost objectivity, because you're not suffering. So you sense pain, you use that as feedback loop, but you're not suffering in that process. You sense pleasure, you use that as feedback loop, you're not suffering in the process. So it's suffering that reduces, not so much about the sensing the fact that something good or bad is happening. That's one way to look at it. The second way to look at it, Sindhuja, which is even more interesting, is that leap of faith that you need. Because in that equanimity, some of the things that we think we cannot live without today by not doing may not be that important anymore. Because your question has a slight logical fallacy there. What's the logical fallacy? You're saying, if I lose doership, and if I'm in that higher state of equanimity, what if I'm not passionate about certain things anymore, right? Because because we are afraid. We cannot imagine a life without being passionate about a few things we are passionate about today. So we are saying that if I lose doership, what if I'm not passionate about these three things that tickle my vanity every day today? But why should you be? So if you are equanimous, it's just like a 10-year-old kid cannot imagine a life without being passionate about toy cars, for example, right? I'm just giving a cliche example. And the kid assumes, if I become an adult, what if I lose my passion about these toy cars, which are so important in my life? But why should an adult be passionate about? So as an adult, you're passionate about other things that have replaced the toys and joys of a 10-year-old. So in that state of equanimity, you're not losing the merry of life. You've replaced what you're passionate about with other things. And that's the leap of faith. You will be surprised to find that you may not be passionate about the same things that you are passionate about today. And that's the beauty. I used to play, as a young child, I used to keep playing this boring cricket in my own balcony in my house in Chennai, 20 years ago. So my mother would say, Dave, aren't you bored as a kid just playing? I mean, I used to play cricket with my friends as well, but I was so passionate about just tapping the ball that just bat and ball, man, like hours and hours and hours. And then one day, my mom gave me a book to read, and I think it was Great Expectations, the very famous book, Great Expectations. Some of you might have read. I love that book. I still remember the characters, Pip and the Miss Havisham, the famous Miss Havisham, again. Anyway, so once I read that book, Charles Dickens and others, I just suddenly, started liking reading more. And then suddenly one fine day, I just dropped that cricket bat and ball, the balcony cricket bat. I still played cricket outside with friends, but this very time consuming, non-beneficial, but adrenaline giving balcony cricket. Just tap, I bowl with my right hand, then bat. Before the ball comes back to me, I have to bat. It bounces off the wall. So I'll have my own rules. If I touch it, it's 1 run. If it hits the glass, it's 2 runs. If I hit a straight dive, it's 4. I had meaning in my own mind. That's Maya, isn't it? For me, it was a big thing. People looking at it, it was such a waste of time. But what I'm saying is, the moment my mind got occupied with another desire, suddenly it automatically dropped this desire. So if I'm worrying as that balcony cricket playing kid, oh my goodness, what if if I lose my passion for this game, how can it doesn't work that way. You will always replace it with something else. The question we have to ask Sindhuja is, what are we replacing it with? Is it in the same level of adulthood, or is it in Shreyas? If you're replacing it vertically by moving to the next level, the quality of happiness increases and you're moving closer to the truth. If you're replacing it with something in Tres, which is the horizontal, say instead of cricket, I'm reading books, instead of books, I'm watching TV, instead of watching TV, I'm going to the bar, instead of going to the bar, I'm doing something. It's the same level. Then what happens is it gives different spikes of joy, but all with the same limitations. After some time, you get bored of that. That also gives them, etc., etc., etc. So when you reach equanimity, you should allow yourself to be okay to be less passionate about things that you're passionate today. That's how you evolve, except where duties reside. Because if you're already opted into certain duties in samsara, you have to dispense those duties in samsaras. But that's where the attitude with which you dispense those changes. Is the attitude with which he saw life after that completely changed. So there are some duties you will continue to perform. But outside of those basic duties, think of how many more things we are opting in today, where we don't even have a prarabdha desire, a strong desire, but we're doing it because we don't know why we're doing it. Those things you will mitigate off when you kind of remove that doership, where I don't need to do 5 things. It wasn't even a desire. You will stick to your duties and build in greater long-lasting desires.
Thanks, Aditya. That helped. Yeah.
Hi, Aditya, over here.
Hi, Varun.
Yeah, so regarding this whole act of giving up a sense of doership, wherein you don't get attached to the pain and pleasure, so which actually brings into the fact of this whole analogy which you gave about that chariot, wherein the whole idea is using the horses as a mechanism for your judgment. That is, when your intellect is so strong, you don't get driven by those senses. Rather, you make a very informed decision, and that's how the driver who's holding the mind is really plays a role. So the idea behind using this as a pyramid is, when you initially might be hostage to the horses when you are at the lower level, but when you keep improving your intellect, and that's when you start leveraging them to guide your way towards the journey. So is this correct understanding?
Yeah, it is correct, Varun. Absolutely. Remember, the mind does not have its own control system. So the mind is just a cesspool of past imprints projecting itself into the future. See, the mind does not have a desire for an apple. Mind does not have a fear for a person. All that's gross. So mind does not have desire for cricket. So mind has imprints which projects itself as desires for things. If cricket is the supply, it latches onto cricket. If something else was supplied, it would have latched onto that. So it's not that cricket is in the mind. Mind has imprints of past reinforcements, which lead to certain passions, hobbies, people, experience of life in the gross world. So mind itself does not have a control system. It's the intellect that establishes the hierarchy. Absolutely. I had a chat question. Rakhi, you have a question? You want to say that to others? You put it on chat to me, I can see.
Yeah, Aditya.
Go ahead, Rakhi. Ask the question to others.
Yeah, regarding fear, I mean what you have started with regarding neuroscience. My question is, fear is a very primal emotion, and most of the times it is automatic and may not be logical to us to control. So if we try to control with some logical things, it seems useless. So how can we be self-sufficient with respect to fear? That was my question.
It's a good question again, because what Rakhi is saying is, once your psychological safety is threatened, you are in that fight or flight. At that time, you're an autopilot response. You cannot, intellect doesn't come to your own service at that point in time. So ideally, the role of intellect is to nip the mind in its bud. Nip it in the, that's the right way to say. Nip it in the bud. Because the moment you don't nip certain thing in the bud, that becomes a desire. Then desire becomes attachment. Then attachment, whatever. It brings great fear, great anxiety, great thing. So if you don't nip it in the bud, because we don't have a strong intellect, and let it go to a point where it's paralyzed you, at that moment, logic and control seems useless. How can we be self-sufficient with respect to fear? That's the question of Rakhi's. Just reiterating so that we're all in the same. Is that the question, Rakhi? Have I summarized it correctly?
Yeah.
So it can be explained many ways. Since you mentioned neuroscience, since I mentioned neuroscience, it's probably a good time to ask about where does our under what conditions does our psychological safety gets threatened, that we go to the threat mode. So let me tell you a story, then I'll show you a slide of David Rock's research. See, in the theory of evolution, not just just go to history. Say when human beings were hunter-gatherers, or even before that, we probably much closer to nature, lives at small groups in the wild, probably in the savannas, in the Great Plains of Eastern Africa. So imagine you were in that forest. You hear it's around 6 o'clock in the evening. There's a lot of course, greens and bushes and trees and all those wild crops and stuff. It's silent, right? It's silent. Your kith and kin, probably the 5-6 other Homo sapiens, resting under a tree, and you're the one guarding them from wild animals or whatever threat. It's pitch silent. And suddenly you hear a rustle in the bushes just behind you, say 6 meters, 10 meters away from you. You can hear a mild sound. Now, what does your brain immediately tell you, Rakhi? Following the story.
I mean, it's a threat in that condition.
What is the threat there?
Threat to physical safety.
Why? Why is a threat to physical safety? Correct, Vibha. So you're right, Rakhi. So the point is, you're hearing a small sound there. It's just it could be the wind, right? In fact, 99 out of 100 times, it's just probably the wind. It's just probably a twig. It's just probably a little bird has crossed. But your instant response for human survival, because evolution is based on survival of the fittest, it's a natural selection of people who are more aware and responsive to threats, who survive over millions of years. So, because if there are two tribes and one tribe did not have this instinct of fear, that tribe would have been eaten by the lion, which was behind those bushes. So if the other tribe has this watchman who has super sensitive for fear, what will he do? Though 99 out of 100 times that noise is just the wind, it's probably 1 out of 100 times it's actually a real lion lurking behind it, ready to pounce on him. He has to run 100 on 100 times, sir. That's how he preserves himself. He cannot take a guess saying the probability of this is 0.01 or 1%. He cannot afford that guess. What if he's wrong, and which of those 100 times is the real line? We don't know. So his threat is activated to propel him into action. Action would probably be to get the right tool or to wake up his kin or to try to kill the lion or whatever it be. So the point is, our human brains, the most reptilian brain, the primitive brain, which is the more instinctive brain, which is not the prefrontal cortex, which are all later developed brains, the most reptilian primitive brain is designed for fight or flight, which is, it makes you freeze at that moment. Why does it make you freeze at that moment? Because the brain senses a threat. So the brain stops all of its other usual work and comes to full attention to that threat. That's why you're freezing, because the brain has kind of stopped focusing on all the other things it usually focuses on, because there is a fright or flight. It all comes. Just like that's why people with a big problem in one organ often suffer from multi-organ failure. That's also probably because the brain is now focusing so much on that one place where it has to attack its enemies that the other organs are in life support mode, battery saver mode. So the brain works like that. So coming back. So the threat is the lion all the time. That's when you survive. Now fast forward many millions of years where we are today. So our environment has changed. You and I would never wake up one morning having to think, oh, is there a lion lurking near my bed or behind that window? Unless you're living in some ranch in a forest. Even then it's all safe. You have a gun, all you do is shoot the animal, unfortunately. But people are like nearly 100% safe. I'm sure in your 30, 40, 50 years of existence, you've never spent a day afraid of whether an animal is going to kill you, right? Now, the human brain, however, hasn't evolved so much, meaning the basic reptilian brain continues to be the same. We've developed a prefrontal cortex, but that fear, it's called amygdala. So amygdala hijack, it's a beautiful word called amygdala hijack. You can go, when your amygdala gets hijacked, you get into fight or flight. But there is no lion anymore to be afraid of. So what are you fearful about now? You're fearful about psychological threats. It's the scientists have found it's the same part of your brain that gets activated as that lion would have activated that primitive Homo sapien. The same part of the brain that gets activated, the same amygdala hijack, but for other things. So I'll show you David Rock's nice, I mean, there are hundreds of frameworks, but one of the frameworks that we discussed yesterday in Lucerne was the SCARF model, which some of you might have heard about. Have any of you heard about the SCARF model of David Rock's? At least one of you, come on. All right, good. So let's look at it. SCARF just talks about, I put it on the screen. This is just from Google Images. It could be, I don't have the deck that we used yesterday. This I just put it up now as I was speaking. So the SCARF talks about 5 things that create this autopilot response in our minds, where the amygdala gets hijacked. We get into a fight or flight. Basically, it creates a threat response in us. It is also the other way is also true. In the presence of these, it creates a reward response. Oops, what happened? Let me share it again. So remember, the scarf, SCARF, when one of that is taken away from you, it creates a threat response. When in the presence of that, it creates a reward response in our brain. Why does sex have pleasure? Anybody? Why does sex have pleasure? Why should sex be pleasurable?
So that we procreate and propagate.
Exactly. So the pleasure is a reward for evolution to ensure humans procreate. Otherwise, if it's just a chore like washing vessels, people would have not survived for millions of years, right? So the pleasure is a reward for sex. So it doesn't mean God gave reward as pleasure. It just means that when natural selection was happening, for those who did not feel pleasure for sex would not have as much sex as people who felt pleasure during sex. So automatically the lineage of people who had more sex obviously procreates more. So it's all natural selection. That's the beauty of evolution. Similarly, what's the why are small children so cute? Why do they tap in? Why do they produce oxytocin in us adults when we look at small puppies, small kids?
Again, it's a reward so that we care for the smaller children.
Exactly, so that they're not left to die. We actually care. So small children are cute because they need parents' attention evolutionarily, because they cannot survive in the world automatically. All small, any creature, small, the puppies or the kids are damn cute. It's not just cute for the parents, it's cute for anybody. Even you go and see another, you lift the kid and stuff, whether it be gender, color, creed, caste, doesn't matter for small kids, isn't it? They're all so cute and chubby and types. So that's a reward. The reward of oxytocin is evolutionary, because children otherwise would die. So for tribes which did not feel that oxytocin for small kids, probably had kids but just left them, because it may seem a horrible thing for you because you have that programming and hormones to feel. How can you do that? But for tribes which felt that bond towards the kids, obviously survived, and therefore we are part of that particular lineage. So we still have that reward mechanism. So these are examples of rewards. So threats and rewards. So the scarf model says psychologically, the presence of what gives us reward, the absence of what leads to a threat response. So I don't want to spend too much time on it, but let me give you a short description. So David Rock found out through brain study that status is a big threat. Status means, where do I stand? Am I valuable? It looks at the relative importance of people and where you are in whichever activity you are in. So it could be, if you're a manager, if status is taken away from you, if your team don't see you as a manager, it could be a threat response to you, right? In your own family, if suddenly your status is taken away, which is your contribution, you don't know whether your contribution is being valuable. You're seen as that man of the house, or you're seen as that lady of the house. Your status is being threatened. Status is very important for us. It brings it's the same fear that the lion behind the bushes brings to us. Same threat is brought when status is taken away from us. Status is that the need for, I am valuable in the role that I'm playing. That's why sometimes when leaders are not respected, they become worse leaders, isn't it? Logically, what should happen when leaders are not respected? They should become better leaders. Then leaders are not respected. What is being threatened? It's a status that's being threatened. So the threat response is to bring the worst in them, because they go into threat response. How the opposite is also true, making it a reward response. You make somebody feel more comfortable with their status, the best in them comes out because the reward response, right? So status is one. Certainty. Again, the lion lurking behind the bushes. Certainty is, we all feel threatened when there is no clarity about the immediate future. It's a big threat for us. This is an unfortunate thing of 21st century. Early man probably never had these psychological problems. There doesn't need to be any, but certainty is clarity about immediate future. How many people in early relationships fail to enjoy the moments and keep thinking about what's going to happen in 2 years? Do we have a future? So the point is, we need certainty as human beings, at some level of certainty where we have a desire. If there is no certainty, it's a threat response. So the point here is, I know where I stand or what will happen is important. That's why in organizations, feedback is so important. Regular feedback, not once a year uprising. So we find through research, and as an organizational consultant, I often find that leaders who provide more consistent, honest, and dialogue-based feedback, telling people where they stand, good or bad. People don't want just good feedback. They're okay with good or bad feedback, but consistent feedback delivered honestly reduces the threat response of certainty. They're okay even if they don't get that promotion. They're okay even if they get bad feedback. But left in the dark is very difficult for people to, even in relationship, even in work, everywhere, isn't it? So you can actually reverse engineer this to your own work, relationships, etc. Am I threatening the status psychologically of that person I'm speaking to? Am I threatening certainty or reducing clarity of immediate future of that person? How can I change that into a reward response? But it's true for you also. You also get threatened because of this. Autonomy. Autonomy is the feeling, the perception that I have control over my environment and what I'm doing and over my life. Imagine the moment you don't have control, there is a threat response. You feel trapped, you feel claustrophobic, you feel suicidal when you lose control over your environment relationship. However, you may do the same thing by choice. Give yourself to somebody, give the control of your whole life to somebody, and you would feel joyous about it because there you're doing by choice. Remember, so the autonomy is choice. So if you limit people's choice and take away freedom, threat response happens. If you give them a perception of choice, then threat response reduces and reward response happens. So even to your own boss, when you're doing some recommendation, always go with option A, option B, because that gives a perception of choice, that it helps with status and autonomy. Similarly, if you're the leader, go to your team and give a perception of autonomy for them. That's why most brands always give you 3 different price points. They know you will often choose the middle one, right? That's why you will have a 1 kg for 1,000 rupees, 2 kgs for 1,500 rupees, 3 kgs for whatever, 3,000 rupees. It doesn't make sense, man, but you will come to the middle one, but you have that feeling of choice. Analysis paralysis is another problem. So too many choice also a problem. But the point is autonomy, right? You have to have autonomy. Relatedness is that in-group, out-group feeling. People feel threatened if they feel out of group. Sense of fitting in is very important. So if you join a office and you feel that you're not in group, there is a clique, a politics, there's a circle, and you feel threatened, you feel that everybody's laughing at you, everybody's thinking about, or you're not being included. That's a lion threat, psychological safety problem. So you can also do that to others. in my own enthusiasm, in my own love for my group or community, and am I excluding certain people? And then I don't understand. I feel so passionate. Why the hell is he not that passionate? Because you're feeling the in group, he's feeling out of group. So that's a threat. You find some of your Toastmasters and stuff. It happens all the time. You have a club of 30 people. You are a senior Toastmaster, and you feel very family there, and you are in an in group. Why the hell should a new member feel that? Unless you, because he's threatened. Am I invited? Am I needed here? So you have to make them feel belong there. So that's the final thing is fairness, which is again very common. Fairness again is a perception of fairness. We feel threatened if we feel that fairness is not applied to us. And fairness doesn't mean a judge or judicial system here. What fairness means here is, I was in the airport, and this happened I keep giving this example. I was a boss of mine, a senior partner at Conferry. I hope I'm not boring you with scarf. It's not Vedanta, but it's, hope it's helpful. It's all about,
It's extremely helpful. Thank you.
Really helpful, yeah.
Okay. And because there's not, you cannot Google scarf in the Upanishads. You will, what is this guy talking about? So I was in the airport a few years ago with a senior partner of mine in my company. Senior partner in consulting is the highest designation. At that time, I was a kind of a principal, a kind of a senior manager kind of a level 3-4 years ago. So this guy is two levels, 3 levels above me. So a guy I look up to, exceedingly, always calm, equipoise. So we were in the airport. We were in the the security check queue, and we had just kept our laptop and other things in the conveyor belt, and we were standing to being frisked and checked. And in the airport, always what happens? There's somebody who cuts the queue, who kind of jumps the line and goes forward. And here's a couple of guys who jump forward, and suddenly my boss became wild. He said, "Mister, go stand back. Can't you see we are in queue? Didn't we buy flight tickets?" I was like, okay, what happened to this guy suddenly? It's not a flight. We were urgent to catch the flight. Our flight, we had 45 minutes, and just 2 people who jumped the queue. Probably they had earlier flights. Probably they didn't want to miss it, whatever. And then I realized that fairness is not about you getting a better decision in a courtroom or something. Fairness is that basic threat where you think that this guy jumping the queue, there was nobody to monitor that, and your fairness has been, your threat response takes over. In fairness, it's very interesting, isn't it? Otherwise, a calm and composed person, when there's a threat to fairness, like in your organization, it's not, imagine they're giving a 1,000 rupee voucher for Diwali to everybody, and your name somehow got missed out. That will give you a greater, feeling in that stomach of disgust and anxiety than even your boss telling you in some other occasion, listen, we can't give you that 2 lakhs bonus because of it, said in a different. Why? Because here it's fairness. My name has got missed out. That's unfair. 1,000 rupees is nothing for you, for example, but that fairness is more important. So that's the threat response. Again, reward. Greater you increase fairness, greater the reward response. So coming back to Raki's question of fear is primal, and most times it's automatic and may not be logic to control. How can we be self-sufficient? That's a question on chat. So Raki, the first step is to become self-aware of what are the conditions in which my antenna goes up and the amygdala hijack happens, the fight or flight happens, the threat response is activated. Every time you suffer, every time you get angry, it is one of these threats that is making you angry. It's not what it seems to be. It's not that other person. It's not that chocolate. It's not that guy in the airport. It's not somebody. It's one of the 5 scarf, SCARF, gets activated. It could be fairness, it could be status, it could be autonomy, it could be relatedness, it could be certainty, whatever it is. And there could be a few things more. It's not my research, but this seems to be pretty exhaustive for me, at least, from a brain level, not from a Vedantic level, but from a brain level, it seems to be. So self-awareness is asking, and I want to ask you that now, either put it on chat or unmute. Let me put the scarf up. If you were to choose 2 out of these 5, that you are personally most vulnerable to individually, what would be the 2 that you, out of your self-awareness, think, I'm prone to threat response? If 2 out of these 5 are taken away from me, what would those 2 be?
Certainty and fairness.
Very interesting. So others, feel free to unmute or respond on chat.
Yeah, I would say the same as Rakesh.
Yeah, I say the same as well.
Autonomy.
Yeah,
Autonomy
certainty and fairness.
Okay, certainty and fairness, there's autonomy on the chat, status, relatedness, basically all 5. So the insight here is each of us, because of our own past experiences, reinforcements, nature and nurture, are more prone and susceptible to certain of these 5 giving us a threat response. So just because in that airport, I did not feel threatened because of those 2 guys jumping the queue, does not mean I'm more equipoised than my boss. It means that I may be prone to something else. So when I first heard of David Rock, I asked myself, which of these 2 I'm most vulnerable? And then I realized I'm most vulnerable to autonomy and fairness. Autonomy and fairness. So if I don't get a sense of choice or autonomy, free will, I can go into a shell, and I can, my threat response is going into a shell. Shell meaning I just, become a pale shadow of myself. I'm not that exuberant consultant. I can be, but I become a pale version of myself. That's my threat response, right? And fairness, I kind of get that emotional swelling if I see fairness taken away from me or another person. And that's so helpful, because the next time you feel that swelling feeling, you stop blaming the stimulus and you start thinking about how is your brain perceiving the threat. And out of that, Raki, emerges the first step of self-awareness, right? So what is threatening me? Now the second step, is there any other, sorry, I'm not monitoring the chat. Oh yeah, no, nothing much. Yeah, so the other point is, now think of one stakeholder. Don't tell me who it is, that's your private information. Either think of somebody in your family or somebody at work who you have an issue with. Not issue meaning it's difficult for your wavelengths to match, or sometimes you've had issues, challenges with that person, right? Don't tell us who that person is. Think of the scarf model and think of, beyond you just being irritated or with that person, think of in this point in life or in that particular job, which 2 they may not be getting enough that leads them to behave certain way. If you want to share if you want to be open and share and unmute, feel free to do that. Otherwise, just put on chat which 2 may be missing that could make them create a threat response.
Certainty and relatedness.
Status and autonomy.
Yeah. So I was just inviting you to think through this lens, right? Just a single framework. You can read more about it later. So Raki, that's the point. So when your antenna is already up with threat, it's very difficult to restore objectivity using your intellect at that point in time. The reason being, one, you're not aware that it's your psychological safety that has been impaired. The reason you're fearful, you always think it's the environment, and you most often become a victim. You take into that victim, you wear the victim hat, saying, I'm victimized by people. But it's your own, why is it that you're in a fight and flight needs to be analyzed. And then when you restore objectivity, when your fear goes off, when that amygdala hijack is removed, when the serotonin comes down, that is where you need to draw the insight and use it for foresight, as we have seen in a couple of classes ago. The role of intellect is not necessarily to control your mind when it's highly emotional, but the role of your intellect is to draw insight once stability has been achieved and use that as a foresight for similar activities in the future. Does that help, Rakhi?
Yeah, Aditya. Thank you.
Excellent. Jay?
Hi, Aditya. Out of many other lines which I have spoken, one line which I have spoken last week that hit me very hard. It is what is most valuable thing is not money, not time. It's more attention. I really loved that, and I mean, it reminds me of one instant that I used to feel in my school days, like in school drills, like when PT sir says attention and stand at ease. I always love to be in the stand at ease position, not attention position. Could you please just share your knowledge, experience about being attentive? I mean, your words about attention.
Yeah, I mean, what I like more in my PT class. So yeah, in fact, I was so dumb when I was young. My PT sir was stand at ease. I studied in a school called PSBB in Padmacheshadri, which was in the news for all the bad reasons in the recent past, if you were tracking it. So the PT sir used to have stand at ease. I didn't realize stand at ease was stand at ease. I just thought there was a word called stand at ease. It's only later I realized it was stand at ease. Anyway, so the attention bit, Jay, it's not about being attentive all the time. That's not the meaning of that. Because again, going back to brain science, our brain needs to operate at different wavelengths at different points in time to be most efficient or most useful for us. The problem with our worlds that we've curated today, deep in samsara and deep in the 21st century, you're busy all the time, is the brain is forced to activate in certain frequencies much, much more than it's capable in terms of evolution. So what happens is our brain is much more tensed in certain frequencies, whereas creativity, innovation, self-development, inquiry happens not in that wavelength. The wavelength of constant attention, the way we define attention today is you're always thinking of past, present, future, the work, then after work, what? Planning for the weekend, then planning for your vacation, then you have to watch these 3 movies, then you're attentive watching a movie. So you're always keeping your brain busy with something or the other. But that's not the, scientists find that that's not the wavelength in which creativity, self-development, inquiry happens. In fact, that's why I'm going to ask you this question again. Think of the time you've got most innovative ideas, generally. What were you doing at that point in time? Put it on chat or unmute and tell me.
When I was in relaxed mode.
Yeah, what were you doing then? If it's, unless it's controversial, you can say that.
Maybe when I wake up.
Okay.
No, daydreaming.
Okay.
When I was in the shower.
Yeah. Most people say shower, driving, that 10 minutes before you go to sleep, tossing and turning in the bed, or when you just wake up during Brahma Muhurtam in the morning when you have not started the karma for the day. Then you got in the train of karma, then full day goes off, right? That 1 hour when the kids are still sleeping, when your spouse is not, is doing something else or sleeping, you self time, whatever. People say 100 different things. So, but how do we foster creativity at work, sir? Because our work is all about thinking of ideas. We put people in a conference room and say the next 1 hour we're going to have design thinking of the new customer product solution. People are not creative that way. People are creative different ways. But we need structure and certainty to everything. So organizations force structure to creativity and stuff. Similarly is Vedanta. It's difficult to put a rigid structure and say, I will become self-realized. It happens in moments of insight, where the brain operates at certain wavelengths that are conducive for self-development. So when I said last week, the most valuable resource for you is not just time, is attention. What I meant by attention is what you're attending to, right? So where are you placing your attention? What wavelengths of how are you leveraging the most of different wavelengths of your brain? How can you not make your brain overwork in just a single wavelength? And how can you allow it to work in multiple wavelengths? People, that's why why are people so adamant to take vacations? I want to chill. I've not had they think it's just because of that beach or mountain. No, it's because without their knowledge, the brain is operating in a different wavelength in a holiday. And because your brain is desperate for that, evolutionarily requires that as well. It manifests itself as a great desire for a vacation. But if you are able to pay attention and attend to different wavelengths of the brain, even in your everyday life, then you are not so desperate for that weekend or vacation or that Netflix, because you're kind of helping it. Our mistake is, even when we allow the brain to operate in different wavelengths, we are using that for chilling or holiday or Netflix. That's nothing wrong in that, but we are still not using it for greater questions. So if you want to, in the path of Shreyas, that's why people say, try to tap into certain parts of the day that are more conducive, like a Brahma Muhurtam, for example. Try to tap into multiple activities that require different wavelengths of the brain to work. For example, why do people meditate? Meditate is not a proxy for self-realization. However, meditation allows you to tap into the part of the wavelengths of the brain wherein insights come up for you without your awareness. You're also doing other things like bhajans, for example, or praising, or bhajans, or singing and other things. Why? Not for its own sake, because that kind of taps into another wavelength. You cannot just read a book in half an hour and ensure you get self-realized. So focus your attention on things that matter holistically, not just one part of it. That's what I meant by, that's the resource you have. Your brain allows you to function in different wavelengths, but our lifestyle doesn't allow us to tap into all these wavelengths. So you're more attentive to, that means you're attentive to all of these wavelengths all the time. Unless you're a sthita prajna, unless you're already in self-development. Why? In self-development, because you've not overly attached to any of these activities, you're always in a calm and equipoised wavelength, where the threat doesn't cause fluctuations in your wavelength. But we're not there. So we have to pay attention to what wavelength of the brain we are serving. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Aditya.
All right, friends. So we have last 5 minutes. Any other questions, or I'll quickly walk you through those bullet points that I shared with you a few weeks ago. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Devi, go for it.
Hi, Aditya. This question is kind of related to what was mentioned already. the certainty part of the SCARF model, and as well as the response to the kind of activities that we need to get in. So I understand that when we have already opted for an activity, we need to do it with the right attitude. But what if we are in the process of making choices, or we are deciding whether we need to get into an activity? We have an element of uncertainty over there where we don't have the complete information, the pros and cons of that option. How do we then decide, particularly if we are more prone to the certainty factor? Like,
yeah.
I hope I articulated it properly.
Yeah, I think I've understood 60-70% of the question. You're saying activities you still have a choice to either say yes or no to. How do you choose? Yeah. You tell me, Devi, how would you choose, considering everything you know? What if somebody asked you this question, how would you respond?
So the last chapters of Bhagavad Gita, we had decided, we had sort of discussed about the kind of kriyas. So those things which we are highly desirous of and which we can't keep away. So it's better to get into that activity, perform that activity in such a way that our desires are dispensed. But if it's still optional, it's better to not get into more samsara by getting into more activities.
Yeah.
Just my thought process on it.
Yeah. Good way to say it. See, activities can be of many kinds. Some activities, when you get in, you can't get out of, like children, right? I mean, it's a 20-25 year project that you're getting into. So it's not just that little fun for the first few years, throwing the kid in the air and stuff. And the samsara begins. It's a beautiful samsara. It's not a bad, it's a blessing to have children, of course. It's a gift from God and all of that we say. But the point is, some samsaras have a project plan to it. Some samsara is a single time thing, isn't it? So you watch a movie, whatever. It's a one-time activity. It does it. So first is the awareness of what you're getting into, probably, right? So we always get into it for a single pleasure we have in mind, but that single pleasure, what is samsara? Samsara means the web of life, the web that gets created, which might have originally been activated because of an innocent single desire. The innocent single, one void for completion makes us enter into an activity. And that entrance comes with it a web of other duties that's required. That's the samsara that we're talking about. Like Narada's example, when he went to that village to ask for water, the only desire at that point in time was that attraction to that young lady there who was giving him a pail of water. He didn't have desires to have grandkids. He didn't have desire to have being a village chieftain. He didn't have desire for the suffering of floods. No. He had only one desire of that attraction there. But that one desire comes with it because it's causation. It's a domino, isn't it? One. You don't have the vision for the remote consequences of your current choices. So that one desire comes with it a lifetime of samsara that you enter into, which you cannot plug out of as easily. So the moment of choice is ahead of an activity, not get into the activity, not after, because a lot of times you cannot unplug yourself of many duties and many things. So that's why sometimes the wise people move to the mountains and sainthood, not because they're afraid of grihastha life or not because they're afraid of samsara. It's because why? From their point of view, like, why? I mean, why get myself into another web of illusory samsara, A person with a kid says life cannot be better without a kid. The person without a kid saying life cannot be better without not. So both are, the datum of happiness seems to come back to the average. Why do I enter more webs and webs of samsara? That's why some people, like, renunciation happens because of this attitude. Renunciation happens because, in my culture, renunciation is important. No. Renunciation happens with the attitude of realization as to why would I want to enter webs and webs of samsara? But there are certain things that you're highly desirous of now. You just cannot renounce those desires because it will only lead to more frustration. So those desires. So firstly, try the method of starvation, which is, do I really want to enter into the samsara? Is there a logical reason why I should? Okay, I need to make money for my family, so I need a job. So job is a good samsara to enter, right? So do I really need the samsara? The second is, that's the method of starvation. You're starving most of your desires by not even opting into them. Unnecessary desires, right? It's only going to create complication. The second is the desires which I need to tickle and entertain. What is the attitude with which I want to dispense those desires so that it doesn't add to my karma? It doesn't add to the imprint in my mind. It doesn't add to my frustration, add to my prarabdha. Rather, the way I'm dispensing those desires, the way I'm acting is removing my initial void, which in the first place required me to get into the samsara. It's a complicated sentence. The way I act in love is to use that action to get fuller, removing that void, selfish void that required me to helplessly get into that samsara, first of all. Not to enhance my void for love, saying I've now become more attached, more possessed, greater void because of that samsara. Rather, the attitude with which is, I have a void for which I'm helplessly require the samsara. But am I using that samsara to my advantage to become fuller by using the supply of that samsara, not become weaker by using the supply of the samsara? If you are entering into it with that attitude, then you will not be caught in the web of karma because you're focusing on self-development. We're a minute ahead of after time, so we'll pause now. Hope you had a useful session. It wasn't particularly from the Upanishad or anything, but it's useful to have these sessions at times. It helps me clarify to myself as well. Have a great week ahead. And as I said in the WhatsApp group, do tell me if you have any recommendations of what you would like to discuss from next week onwards. Be in touch. Happy week. Happy long weekend for what's left. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you, Aditya. Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you. Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you, Aditya.